also First Coast News down in Jacksonville, Florida, which, of course, played host to the latest meeting between the Florida Gators and the Georgia Bulldogs. As we check in with Brent. Brent, I trust that you survived all the activities, all the festivities, everything that goes along with the world's largest outdoor cocktail party in at least decent shape. Did you get through that okay, Brent?
I did. It was a good Saturday. The weather was perfect, and Georgia had a big win. Florida showed some promise, so we were glad for that. And by the way, happy Halloween to everybody. I'm sure Trav Pops would appreciate some Monster Mash at some point played, but it was last week was good, but it just set up what we got ahead of us this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely huge weekend. And when you look at it, Brent, got basically championship games in each division. We're doing a trick and a treat for the SEC season to date. And so I want to start there with you. Give me your biggest trick of the SEC season to this point. It can be good or bad. A team maybe that didn't live up to expectations. Probably more of a negative connotation when you talk about a trick. I mentioned the combined $8.7 million that Gus Malzahn and Kevin Steele are getting this season for 5 wins to this point. What do you got? Maybe something or a player or coach that hadn't lived up to it to this point. That's tricked their fan base.
And I certainly can't disagree with that either. They really Auburn struggling. Frankly, Trav, I think that continues with A&M coming up. A&M 7-0 at Auburn, which is interesting. Or they haven't lost at Auburn. The 7-0 is Gus after a bye week, but I think Jimbo's got their attention this week, and they will play. They will play much better.
Can you trust that A&M offense on the road, though? After what we saw Saturday night against Mississippi State, it just seems like if you take away Travion Williams, the recipes remain the same. And unless Mond really chips in with some plays via his legs, now that passing game for Jimbo, other than Jay Sternberger, the tight end who's been outstanding, on the outside, it's just a bunch of guys. But you like A&M in the game Saturday?
Yeah, I do. I think Mond rebounds, and I think Elko is able to get that defense to where they're playing well. You don't see Jimbo losing too many in a row at that point either. And again, I think what fools people a little bit is that Auburn ran through that Ole Miss defense, and that would probably be my trick. There was a little bit of speculation that Ole Miss defense would be a bit better, but they're last in rush defense, second to last in pass defense. And look, they may keep Matt Luke, and I appreciate them possibly having either even a winning or certainly a break-even record, but they've really got a clean house on that defensive side of the ball in Oxford.
Yeah, and you worry about that from the standpoint of Freddie Roach, the former Alabama linebacker, now the defensive line coach for Ole Miss. Although I want to say Freddie signed like a 3-year deal before this season. So at the coordinator level, I think you could see some changes and maybe at some positions around that Ole Miss defense. But maybe Freddie Roach is able to sort of withstand that. So you've got Auburn as your trick. What about a treat? I thought it was pretty obvious in talking about sort of a team, a program, maybe even a player that's exceeded expectations going into this season. The one I settled on was the one up in Lexington, Kentucky. I didn't know where else I could really go with that one. Well,
I would agree, and I would throw the Gators in there. To a lesser degree too, Trav. I mean, with the possibility for them now that the Georgia game's out of the way. I mean, they've got some 50-50 games, but they could run the table and be 10-2. And I can tell you, there weren't very many people around here thought that group would be 10-2. But number one by 4 has got to be Kentucky. Now, look, I don't think they beat Georgia. But Trav, but for a myriad of reasons, this has got to be the biggest game in Kentucky football history, does it not? If for no other reason that if they were to win and then win out, go to Atlanta, I mean, just what's at stake if they could possibly win the game Saturday? Not saying they run the table in November, but they would set themselves up for something tremendous.
Absolutely. And, when we look at Georgia on the other side of that, even with a 19-point win over Florida on Saturday, there just doesn't seem to be a lot of sizzle still around this Georgia team. I mean, they checked in last night in the CFP initial rankings at, I guess, sixth?
Yeah.
So, they're in a good spot, but it doesn't seem like going into this game against Kentucky, I think Georgia is a 9-point road favorite, so that's saying something about the perception of Georgia, I guess. But who do you like in the game? Do you think Kentucky can pull it off, or are you thinking that Georgia's still just a little too talented?
Georgia just still has a better roster. I mean, Kentucky, give them credit. They've got the second best scoring defense in the nation, much less the league. Now, if Benny Snell Jr. can, if he ran for 150, that would make the difference in the game. But I don't have that much confidence in Terry Wilson, who showed up toward the end of the game against Missouri. But I still think Georgia's got the better roster. They've been in bigger games than this, even though they lost 30-something players from last year. And listen, your point's a good one about Georgia. When you talk to the people who cover them every day, Trav, if you ask them who is their leader on that team, they still probably couldn't tell you. They've got the best tight end in the nation, Isaac Nauta, finally decided to throw 5 passes to him, and that made a big difference. They're still struggling with their run defense, injuries on the offensive line. What are they going to do now with Justin Fields? So, I mean, to dovetail what you're saying, you've got a team that is 6th in the nation, but right now they've got as many questions as anybody, don't they?
It's a young football team, too. This is a Georgia team that you probably need to get this year.
Yeah.
Because as we outlined last week, talking about all the sophomores in the Southeastern Conference in general, and Georgia is definitely home to more than a few of those guys. So the thing we have to keep in mind with Georgia is that, as you said, lost a lot of guys from last year and very young by SEC standards when you look around even the rest of the league. So making the playoff, winning an SEC championship this year should be viewed as even a bigger achievement than it was a year ago if it plays out that way for Kirby Smart and the Dogs. Let's get into Alabama and LSU. I've been breaking down this game all week, been doing some preview work for BamaOnline.com. I'll have 3 defensive matchups for Alabama and LSU from the Alabama perspective coming up later this afternoon on the website. I'm working on the offensive side of the ball right now. When it comes to just that, offense versus defense, I'm struggling to come up with a matchup where I don't like Alabama, or at least, it's even. In trying to find an area of those two sides of the ball, Brent, where LSU might have the advantage in this game, where would you look?
Well, I'm with you on offense. I mean, they have struggled greatly offensively, or at least they just don't have the bell cow that they used to. I mean, Nick Brissett and Clyde Edwards-Helaire are okay, but they're certainly not the guy. They're not Geis or they're not Leonard Fournette. And I think, Trav, you see that at wide receiver. I mean, the Chase kids had his moments. They thought Jonathan Giles would be a lot better than what he's been. Foster Moreau has some of his moments at that point too. But I would certainly agree with that. And obviously Joe Burrow is. I mean, he's pretty consistent. He's not going to wow you with with anything. And the thing I've seen so far is something like 31-16, and I think when you look at their offense, I think that's probably what you've got. But because Trav, frankly, even in a game like the Mississippi State game, where they really should have dominated, the main thing they got was field goals from Cole Tracy instead of touchdowns, and I think that's kind of the as good as the defense is. There's no doubt the offense is pretty pedestrian.
Yeah, and defensively, there's some dudes on that side of the ball. As we all know, Devin White going to miss the first half at linebacker for the Tigers. That secondary we're well aware of, from Grant Delpit to John Battle to the corners in Fulton and Greedy Williams. Very, very good at those four spots. One area where I've talked about this week where LSU is going to have to answer the bell big time is in their nickel package at that star position for LSU. Because as we've seen, Alabama will get Jerry Jeudy in the slot, maybe even Jalen Waddle in the slot. And when they get their guy at that spot matched up against your third corner, it can be especially tough. But, that matchup, the Alabama pass offense against this LSU pass defense, I think if it was a 7-on-7 sort of situation, LSU would feel as good about it as you possibly could. What's interesting for LSU is there isn't that guy up front that generates a lot of heat on his own, whether it's an edge guy like an Arden Key that we've seen in the past, or an interior guy like Glenn Dorsey years ago. Solid in that defensive front, but Dave Aranda's has had to have been even more creative maybe than he's been in the past in sort of manufacturing pressure for this LSU defense.
Yeah, no doubt. And if anybody can do it, I think he can. I still think he's one of the best D coordinators around anywhere, and that's going to be interesting to see what he's able to do. I mean, Glenn Logan, Justin Thomas, those kids are still pretty young. Brendan Piecco has had his moments. Rashard Lawrence at times. I mean, some of those kids had a few plays against Florida when I saw them in person. But again, the thing that really that Alabama does that brings teams so much trouble is, I mean, to me, Trav, the obviously all eyes are going to be on Jeudy and the wide receivers. Well, where Bama drives people crazy is with the tight ends and Irv Smith. All these running backs can catch coming out of the backfield. And look, those are the guys that may make as much hay as the wide receivers come Saturday night.
Yeah, I think Alabama's running backs are somehow flying under the radar this week. When you talk about a top three of Damian Harris, Josh Jacobs, Najee Harris, those are the top three running backs in the game, period. I'm talking about for both teams.
Yep.
Alabama's third back, I would take over Brissett. Whether you want to give me Najee Harris or you can give me any of the three for Alabama. And I agree. I think Alabama's running backs are going to end up proving to be a bigger part of this thing on Saturday night than a lot of people are expecting. Now, kicking the football, Brent, we hate to beat up on Alabama too much because I think it's overdone. I think Alabama's actually been more successful kicking the football, even in place kicking in the past than maybe the Alabama fan base likes to give their guys credit for. But there's no doubt. I mean, Cole Tracy, you mentioned him earlier. He's 21 of 23 on field goals this year. 17 of those have come in the red zone, though, which is still been a good thing for this LSU team in the way in which it's been able to win games. But I'm not sure that translates so good to Saturday night against this Alabama offense.
So you can swamp field goals against Mississippi State and still have a real chance to win the game. I mean, Saban would be glad to swap 7s for 3s all night long without any problem at all, which makes you wonder where does LSU compensate for some of this? Is that in some of this hidden yardage in the return game, also, Trav, it deserves to be mentioned, and obviously they haven't had them, but you really wonder about this LSU defense, how good they would have been if Levon Chason and Eric Monroe, if those kids, Monroe, the number one safety in the country, and Chason, a 5-star, where would they be if those kids had played this year?
Yeah, Caleb Chason is as big a loss as LSU has had, because, as I talked about earlier, sort of that dynamic edge guy that LSU typically has.
Right.
That's what went away when he went down with the knee injury in the opener against Miami there at Jerry World. As we let you go here, Brent, on a Wednesday edition of Southern Fried Sports presented by Carty and Lloyd, attorneys at law, and Mercedes-Benz of Tuscaloosa, give us your pick for Saturday night at Death Valley. How do you see this thing playing out?
I think it's 35-17 type game. I think it's a game that I think LSU would have to score, obviously, in the 30s to be able to win it, and I just don't see that happening. I think, though, that they've got to settle down early on. The first quarter, to me, is going to make all the difference in who's able to win the game. Alabama's just got to let the emotion take care of itself, and they've been off for a week. Will they be rested and ready to go and hot as a firecracker, or will they kind of be stuck in the mud for a quarter until they can get things going But regardless, if Tua, or you get an early fumble or something like that, they've just got to settle down and relax and be who they are and play their game. If they do that, they'll be fine. But I think that first quarter, at the end of there, if Alabama's in stalemate or ahead, that's going to make a huge difference in this game.
There you go. Brent Beaird of College Sports Today and also First Coast News of Jacksonville down there in Northeast Florida. Brent, as always, a lot of fun catching up with you. Look forward to doing it next week. Enjoy the massive SEC and college football weekend that is here upon us.
Yeah, we'll do that. Things will clear up somewhat when we talk next week, and hope everybody has a good Halloween, too.